Hello everybody, I'm Jim Kibler, and this is a video. It's a continuation on the series of building our Colonial Long Rifle kit. This video is on stock carving, and it certainly applies to any other long rifle you might like to carve as well. Stock carving is a very big subject, so we won't be able to cover everything. What we'll basically do is just sort of demonstrate some of the techniques that I use, and it'll be more of an overview rather than a complete step-by-step. A complete step-by-step video will take many hours, so this will just be an overview. But so this is we had been stocking a maple gun. This is one in walnut that I'm going to carve. The maple one that we had been putting together isn't going to get carved, so we've switched to a walnut stock gun. And I've never carved black walnut before. I've carved lots of guns, but I've never carved black walnut. So we'll see how this works out. It's a pretty good piece of black walnut, a real fine grain that doesn't have a whole lot of porosity, so it seems like it's going to work pretty well. The first step in carving a long rifle is just to decide on designs. Well, let me take one step back. The first step is to make sure your stock is properly prepared. And we went over that in previous videos on sanding and preparing a stock for carving. I'd like to make one note regarding that is there's really no extra wood left for carving. And that's, you shouldn't leave any extra wood for carving, with the exception of perhaps a little bit above the butt plate surface here, and it can just be a tiny bit. This basically has very little to none above the butt plate. It may have a little bit, but we'll still have enough wood to do the carving. This wood does ramp up a little bit. I don't know if you can see it from that angle, but it does ramp up towards the cheek piece a little bit, so you can take advantage of that. And you can even taper the base wood down from the edge of the butt plate towards your design a little bit. So there's sometimes a misconception that you need a lot of wood to do carving, or you need extra wood on your stock to do carving, and it's oftentimes not the case. Most often not the case. There's some rare exceptions where there's some particular designs that do require a lot of wood, but it's not very common. So okay, back to the designs of the carving. This is a very big subject in itself. The best advice I can give is, if you're just beginning, which I assume if you're watching this video you probably are, is to study original examples. You hear people say it all the time, and people probably get tired of hearing it, but it's true. And it's best to pick out some original examples that you like and just copy them when you're learning. To try to develop your own designs without having that background, it's probably going to not work out, and it's going to look pretty bad. So I'd recommend studying original examples. In person is great, but if not, all the published sources. You find a lot of examples online. There's all kinds of books that show examples of carving designs used as well. At some point we may put together some designs that could go with the kit. It would be good examples to use on the kit, and that may be helpful as well. I'd also like to add right now that we do sell a practice carving kit. It's a book that goes into more detail about the procedure to carve a long rifle. It also has a plastic casting of some carving that I've done, so you'll be able to look at it in person and kind of feel the carving, see what it looks like, and a practice stock as well. So check that out if you want a little more information. Might be something that helps you out. This stock here, I spent yesterday getting some designs drawn on it. Now unfortunately this walnut and doesn't show the pencil lines very well. This is silver pencil of some kind that shows up on walnut better than regular pencil. So I spent the day drawing out these designs. I've done a little work on the carving up here already, but there's plenty more to show you. So the process of drawing can take time. Like I said, I probably spent the biggest part of yesterday drawing this out, and that might seem like a long time, and it is, but it sometimes takes a while to get a good design. You know, I could have certainly drawn it faster, and I can come up with something that would look pretty decent in a relatively short amount of time, but I keep trying to make it look a little bit better, and I'm just, you know, as your skills develop, you know, you want to try to push it a little further and make something a little nicer. So there's nothing wrong with spending time drawing carving, and keep in mind that it's not going to likely look any better after you carve it than it does when you've drawn it. So design takes a while, and don't be concerned about that. So this is going to be a relief carved gun. What that means is the design is going to be above the background, so it's going to stand in relief. So the process to achieve that is basically to outline the design that you've drawn, and then excuse me, and then remove wood between those areas that you've outlined, creating the background, and then shaping your design. So that's basically the idea in a nutshell. You might also notice that the drawing that I've made is a little bit sketchy in some ways, not real fine of a line, and it's probably better when you're first starting out to draw a little more carefully, erase, and try to make your lines a little finer. But you know, I've carved enough, I can get away with it, and I don't have to spend all that time trying to refine the design. So in order to outline carving, there are a lot of different techniques. You're probably familiar with some of them. It can be as simple as using a knife to outline your designs. In this case, this is a skew chisel, but you can use it like a knife. You can outline the designs. It's the good part about it is that it only requires one tool. The bad part about it is that this tool can tend to follow the grain, and it's hard to have a lot of control over it. It takes a lot of skill to have control over a knife to outline carving. It can be done, but it does take a lot of skill, a lot of hand strength. Another method is to use a V-shaped tool, a veiner, or I guess they're called parting tools. It's a V in cross section, and you can use it you can push it along with your hands, or you can tap it with a mallet and drive it around your designs. This technique was used a lot on American long rifle work. Again, the good thing about it is that it only requires one tool. It's pretty fast. Drawbacks of it is that with the V tool, you're always fighting the grain, at least at some point. Unless you're running right with the grain, you're always cutting against it on one side or the other, unless you're running right with the grain. So it can tend to tear a little bit. They're tricky to sharpen, and in fine detailed carving, they don't necessarily excel. They're good at, they're best at you know, bigger designs, bigger elements, those sort of things. But there's, you know, I have carved with just a V tool, and I want to try to do it more in the future and become a little more familiar with it. But I have done it a little bit. And then the final method, well, there's basically two more methods that I'll talk about. Is the first we'll talk about is a stabbing method, and that is using gouges. You can see gouges. There's a gouge, a couple gouges of various shapes and sizes, and chisels outline the carving. The good point about it is this method is that you get very crisp lines. You can do very detailed carving. The downside of it is that you have a lot of tools. They're expensive, and you have a lot of tools to maintain. So there's sort of a give and take all the time with whatever method you choose. Okay, here is the final method we'll talk about, and that's using a narrow chisel, you might call it. This is maybe a little over a 1/16 in width, probably 3/32 I guess in width. And you can see the shape of it when we look at it in this direction. It's just more or less a kind of a V shape. And I'll rotate it a little bit. You might be able to see a little more of the shape of it. I'm going to turn it again like this. So it's more or less just comes to shape sort of like a screwdriver, but rounded. So the faces are on a bit of a radius. That allows you to walk around turns and not have the corners dig in. So this method you can just push it along with your hand, work it along a design, and it's very versatile. It's very cheap. The downside is you can end up with some kind of jagged lines around your design if you're not careful. But if you're careful, you can make very nice work using this tool. This was a tool that Gary Brumfield used a lot and did very nice work with it. So, okay, enough of the talking. Let's do some carving. So, if you look up here at the Tang area, you can see that's an area that is not complete, but it has the basic design outlined, and that's what we're going to demonstrate in another area of the stock here. So I'm going to try to turn it if I can, get it in the vise where it's going to stay. So the area we're going to work is on this side of the cone. So you might want to come around here. So that's the area we're going to work. I don't know if you can see the silver line on there very well, but there is a bit of a silver line. So this is an area that's going to kind of define the cone. So let's go ahead and get to outlining this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the curve, and I'm going to pick out gouges that are probably going to match that curve. So then I'm going to basically just stab in. So let's see if I picked a good one or not. I think this one will be okay. Okay, and I'm going to work it around. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a different tool because I need a little different radius now, a little flatter tool. So I'm going to... Okay, so we'll pick a little flatter tool this time to follow this contour that I have sketched on here. Okay. Now pick up a different tool. Pretty flat one probably will work now. Okay, I'm going to go to a different tool, back to one with a little more radius. And then finally one just a little tighter, I think. It might work. I think we're going to go a little tighter than that. So sometimes it does take a little bit of fooling around to get exactly what you want, which tool you want. But as you carve more and more, you become more familiar, and you can kind of pick out which tools are going to work best. Okay. So I'm kind of zoom in on close up on that area. You can see that line we just cut. So we'll keep on going. Now we're going to use a flat tool, just a straight chisel to cut this straight line. Carving is something that takes quite a bit of time. It's not anything that happens really fast. Okay, doesn't look too bad. A little bit of a A little bit of wobble in my line, but not too bad. When I cut, I like to keep the tool in the cut and then walk it along, kind of fulcrum it off my thumb, advance it maybe half, 2/3 of the width of the tool. You can pull it out and reposition, but I find I get a little smoother line using this method. So now we're gonna, if I don't cut myself, I'm gonna try to pull around here. Okay. That's looking pretty good. A different tool. One more different tool here. Let's see here. Okay. Now we'll use a straight one just for a little bit and we'll finish it off. And one thing to keep in mind, it's good to get these lines as nice as you can to start with, but they can be adjusted a little bit in the carving process. So if a line doesn't suit, you can change its shape just a very little bit. So let's see what I can do here to make this a little nicer. Needs to start curving back on itself here. Okay, and something a little tighter. And then probably one a little bit tighter at the end. Okay, so that doesn't look too bad. That's what we're going to go with anyway. So that's basically a quick summary of the process to outline carving. Like I said, it's not full detail, but I think it kind of shows the idea. Okay, so to continue with the incise lines, I'm just going to talk about the toe molding. The toe line is a line that goes along the bottom of the stalk. It's going to be in relief, but again, we have to outline it. So I should have said, instead of incise lines, I should have said outlining carving. So long straight lines can sometimes be a little bit difficult to cut in. You can use a wide chisel, even one wide, something like this, or even wider than this. You can, work it along piece by piece, and that works okay, works pretty good. Another method I use, which is kind of a little bit unorthodox, but is to use a knife shaped like this, and kind of see the shape of the tip. So the idea is you can kind of push down with the knife and push it away from you and roll it forward, and it'll follow the line pretty good. So the best way is for me just to demonstrate it, and then you'll be able to understand it a little bit more. So I've drawn a line on the stalk, which is a decent line to go by. And we're going to put it on it. And we're basically just going to slide the knife along and roll it. And since it's a pretty long knife, it'll track itself. It does a pretty good job for lines like this. You can even use it for slow sweeping curves in carving, so it can go around a bit of a radius. Okay, so that's far enough. And ideally, you don't have any like swales and inconsistencies. And I have a little bit of an inconsistency here and there, but it's pretty good. See that I've got a little bit of a bulge here, and I didn't go real deep. So the good thing about that is I can come back and kind of make that slight adjustment to it. It won't be that bad of a chore to try to true this up a little bit. You can true it up several ways. I'm just going to try to true it up with this knife. You can true it up with a file, and a V-shaped file to go down the line. There's a lot of different ways. So come back this way. Come back. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So anyway, that's something that might help for long lines. So after using the knife, I then follow up with a chisel to deepen that cut a little bit. You can also, I tend to just drive these tools just sort of with a paring technique, or just using my body weight to push the tools in. You can drive them with the mallet as well. Some people like to do it that way. I've never felt good about doing it that way. Like I said, I'm just advancing it maybe half or 2/3, my offhand, and then pushing the tool in. One other thing I'd like to talk about real quick is lighting. You can see I have an articulating arm light, and that's very, very important for carving. You want to have directional light as opposed to fill light. Directional light will show shadows and contours and shapes much better. So I've actually dimmed the overhead lights, and I'm using just the directional light. And this, whoops, my chisel's getting a little off course here, so I can bring it back. I kind of lost it there. Good enough. So now that's outlined, and the background can be removed and relieved. So I will use some other gouges to end this cut. It'll end in a bit of a radius. So it's just the straight line segment.